a quick presentation on the working group and the seminar series. So I'll share my screen here, and if you see anybody coming up who wants to be let in the room, just please let them in the room. You can press the admit button. If I can find, this is the right one. All right, great. All right, so the way that it's going to work is that I'll have a quick presentation on the seminar series. I'll then hand it over to our two great speakers today. Each speaker will give, Dorothy and Cristina, each will give about a 15-minute presentation, and we'll have about 15 minutes for discussions and questions and answers. So first of all, welcome to the working group 2 for Digi-Net. It's on digitalization, age culture in organizations. We have a wonderful group of academics, practitioners, representatives of NGOs and advocacy groups, all interested in the subject in this subject of digitalization. Very briefly, here are the here's the remit of our working group and the overall cost action program. I don't know if you all have had much experience with cost action, but this is it's a great European program to bring academics and others together to research and to discuss certain issues in which there might be opportunities for collaboration. So Martina, who's leading the overall program, invited me to a session a couple of years ago, a training session for on age and gender equality, and was able to bring a couple of PhD students to the session as well. Many opportunities in this cost action program on age and digitalization to involve both you and your wider network in the group. So one of the things that I'll be encouraging you to do is to spread the word as much as possible. And if there are people who you think might be interested in the program, please invite them to get in touch with me. I'll help bring them into the group. So the questions that we're interested in this particular working group is what knowledge is available regarding work inequalities in later life, which are related to digitalization. So both how digitalization can act as a barrier to older people, especially when it comes to work, but also how digitalization can be an enabler for older workers as well. I told this story before. Forgive me, those of you who were in the working group a couple of weeks ago, in having to hear this story again. But a really nice example of how digitalization can be an enabler is a conversation that I had with a neighbor of my dad's back in America. My mom very sadly passed away last year, and I spent a couple of months in America with my dad. But then since I came back to Leicester, my dad, his house has been like Grand Central Station. He tells me that he keeps having these people, neighbors, friends, relatives, whoever else, who keep knocking on his door, finding out how he is, checking in on him and everything. And a couple of weeks ago, I got this message on Facebook Messenger from one of his neighbors who's about my age. And she said, listen, your dad's doing really well. I don't think there's any problems or anything, but I think you should get him a life alert. And I don't know if any of you know but in America, there used to be this this TV commercial for Life Alert. What it is it's this pendant which goes around an older person's neck, and on that pendant is a button, and the button you press if the person falls, if they need an emergency service, if they need to contact somebody, they just press the button and it contacts an ambulance service, and the ambulance comes and picks them up. Now, in a way, that's very useful, but it's also very much a symbol of being elderly because of the commercials, because of what it symbolizes, and so forth. Uh, and I said to my neighbor, I was like, "Well, there's no way he's going to get a life alarm." He doesn't quite need it, but he does he does have, because he had back surgery a couple of years ago, he is at greater risk of falling than than he was in the past. So I could sort of see your point that he might need something, especially now that he's living independently. He might need something to just to alert if he needs somebody to come very quickly. So I had to think about it. I was like, well, you know what? He won't get a life alarm, but I might be able to convince him to get a smartwatch, and smartwatches are really good for older people who are living alone, because not only can just press a button on the phone to call somebody if you need a call, but apparently you can also, if somebody falls down and the watch detects a big thud, then it automatically contacts the person of contact. So it can actually be very useful, and it's something that's kind of neat. You can also use it to turn on and off lights. You can use it for the television or whatever else. So even though my main aim was to get him to get something that would make sure that if he has an accident, somebody's alerted, uh, he saw this as something that was positive, that he could use the latest new technology. So I emailed my neighbor back, and I was like, I got some good news and bad news for you. The good news is my dad said he'll get a smartwatch. Bad news is you're going to have to show him how to actually use it. So it's a nice story about sort of integrating these three themes of age, digitalization, and culture all in one. So we're looking at how digitalization might lead to inequalities, and also how it can overcome some inequalities. What are the best conceptual approaches for understanding some of these inequalities? Um, how are work inequalities in later life discussed in the media and social debates and policies and so forth? What are the health and social implications of digitalization across different groups of older workers? I'm doing a project now with some colleagues at the YN Society, a group that represents older Chinese migrants in the Manchester area, and they're doing some really exciting work on using social media to get the message out on the lived experiences of their members. And how do we reduce some of these inequalities? So this is very much a practical, both the theoretical and a practical side to the working group. I won't read through this, but this is the overall aim of Digi-Net, to address issues of work inequalities and how digitalization then factors in. Here's the research objectives as well. Synthesize existing knowledge, investigate and construct some theoretical models on work inequalities and digitalization. Assess some of the implications, develop a conceptual and theoretical network to take a bottom-up perspective on identifying innovations and implementation of policies and practices to address some of these inequalities, dissemination, and coordination between academics, both within Europe, but also with international colleagues. I've got a couple of colleagues I just visited over the summer in Southeast Asia. There's a colleague that's in Singapore who is doing some really exciting work using virtual virtual reality the goggles to help older people in things which are sort of everyday life. And he gave me this really interesting example of one of the big problems that a lot of elderly people in Singapore have is um, using bank machines, using ATM machines, and they get kind of flustered sometimes in using them in trying to use them in a public setting, because you'll have people in the background who are sort of complaining and grumbling. They're not going fast enough and so forth. So they give up very quickly. And what they end up doing is taking their bank card and giving it to their care worker. And the care worker is like, I don't want to touch that. The last thing I want to do is to handle a bank card of one of my clients. So he's developed this AI, this virtual reality, so that people they can try out using a bank machine without actually having it being in front of a bank machine. To create virtual collaboration and open space, and this is one of the objectives of this seminar series, to build international capacity, to disseminate knowledge and experience, and then to attract the next generation of early career investigators. So there's a very strong mentoring element to all cost action programs, and it's something that's very much a priority for us as well. So do invite um, your colleagues who are early career researchers, who are PhD students, and so forth, to be part of this network, to be part of the seminar series, but to be part of the broader network as well, because there's some wonderful opportunities for training, both training and dissemination. A little bit about the seminar series. We're hoping to have the seminar series once a month on the Wednesday of the first full week of the month. We originally said the first Wednesday, and then I realized for February, the first Wednesday was the first. So it's kind of like how American elections are. American elections are always the Tuesday of the first full week of the month, and I guess that's the same way that we'll do it here. So we'll put it into the calendars to have the first Wednesday of every month, 1 to 2:30 Central European time. So that's 12 to 1:30 UK, Ireland time, and adjusted to your to your own specific areas. Um, we'll have two speakers in each session, about 15 minutes each for each speaker, followed by questions and discussions. And as I said before, please do encourage those who are at the earlier stages of their careers to participate as well. And when we're talking about PhD students, it doesn't just have to be a PhD student who's at the very end of their research. There are opportunities for them to disseminate, to share their research throughout their PhD journey. So if they've completed a literature review and they want to spitball some ideas in terms of a research gap or how they're going to approach the research gap, this is a great venue for this. As I mentioned before, we'll have the sessions that they'll be recorded throughout, but we'll cut out the parts with the presentation, which we'll put onto social media. One of the reasons I said before that is we carry it throughout is because maybe early career researchers could benefit from hearing the questions and answers and so forth. Another reason is because inevitably, if I try to record and then stop it and then record, I always forget, and then I forget to do get one of the presentations. The rota will be set by me, so if you'd either be interested in giving a presentation or you know somebody who might be interested, please have them contact me and I'll set the rota up. I'll put people on as soon as possible. And if you could tell me as quickly as possible so that we can set up a rota for the year, then that would be very helpful. I think the way that things usually work best is that if you have a combination of somebody who is more established in the field, who's also given a presentation alongside somebody who's early career, then that gives a really nice balance, and it makes the early career researcher a little bit more comfortable in terms of how they're presenting. Please keep up to date on Digi-Net. There's these are the social media links. I'll be putting these onto the presentations onto onto the cost action program's social media platforms. But have a look at them as well, because there they'll also be posting opportunities to be involved. So I believe there's a training session which is coming up fairly soon on conducting a systematic review. Now, that's going to be really helpful for PhD students, especially PhD students who are in their first year, no matter what their area is. So even if they're not doing something on age and digitalization, they could really benefit from taking part in this. There are two sessions. There's going to be one that is in person and one that's online. Have them take part. If they take part, then they can learn something which will then help them in their further studies. So I think I've gone on hopefully I haven't gone on too long, but this is the little bit about the cost action program and about our working group. I'll now hand over to two very good speakers, great speakers who are going to be talking about digitalization and work in two contexts. The first is Dorothy Sutherland Olson, who is going to talk a little bit about a project that she's been carrying out on career learning and older workers. Following her, we'll have Cristina Tofan, who's going to talk a little bit about her research on older teachers and their experiences in the world of work, and how digitalization can also create some challenges for them in terms of maintaining their employability. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and hand the floor over to Dorothy, if I can. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Matt. I'm going to present a project that we finished. We completed it just before the pandemic. Learning digital. But we've done some of the publications obviously came afterwards. We're still publishing on the findings. The theme is not exactly the same as the theme for the group, but I think some of the findings and the examples are very relevant for this group, and I hope you find them interesting. So this was a project financed by the Research Council in Norway, and our theme was actually to look at the relationship between employability and competence and learning. And this is based on the idea that there might be inequalities there with whether seniors get the opportunity to continue to learn. And we know already from other findings that competence is often one of the reasons given for why people leave the workplace early or withdraw and become less actively engaged. So this was our starting point. So digitalization was not really central with this project, but I think we find a lot of interesting examples about digitalization. So I'm going to summarize the findings, try to pick out what's most relevant for you. We have some findings from a study of OECD data, this PX study, which I'll talk about. And we also have some findings from interviews, which are more specifically on digitalization. So this PX study, any of you who are working with education will know about this study. It's carried out every 5 years, and it includes people right up to their 80s, and it's done in over 50 countries, and the data is quite good. It's publicly available. So it studies competencies, literacy, numeracy, and digital competence. And one of the findings from this, which is a bit scary for quite a lot of us here, is that our learning activities, they say learning, declines from the age of 36, which puts a lot of us into this group. And this is for a few countries here, and you just see the trend going down, and it starts really early, and it just goes way down. So this is a bit depressing, this first finding. But what does PX study? They study formal learning. They study the kind of learning that gives study points, or courses, things that can be counted. And it's maybe not so surprising that people over 55 don't do much of this. I mean, most of us do our higher education when we're in our 20s. So we're not still producing study points in our 50s. So maybe this is not so surprising. What they did ask, though, was who relies on informal learning. And they found that the over 55s rely heavily on informal learning. So this is quite interesting because we don't know so much about what this learning is and what it produces. So here's just some examples of informal learning. This is from another study we did. And this is what people were asked which preferred ways of learning they had, and they were over 50. And the one at the top there is sharing experiences with colleagues. It's not like going on courses or getting study points. The next one was participating in new projects. Others were reading. And then you got onto the more formal ones like courses and things that can be counted. But this is interesting because this means that if we're going to look at how our seniors are going to learn about new technologies, if that's what they're going to do, then we need to maybe look at different ways, not sitting in the classroom and learning the way we learned, but maybe learning in other ways. We also found that those who complete their formal education late in life remain in employment longer. I'm not sure if this is very relevant for us, but it was a finding. This is the article here, Richard Desjardins. He's at UCLA in the US, and he's done quite a lot of work of this in this project. There was some discussion about how relevant is this, because maybe people who complete their education late haven't contributed so much to the pension, so maybe they have to work longer because of that. We don't know the reason, but it seems to be a correlation. The next part of the thing which I want to talk about is the interviews. Now, the interviews were just in Norway, so they're limited value in terms of comparative studies and things like that. But I think they give some interesting examples about how older people learn at work. The first example is not computers, as you maybe have thought. This is digital welding. And this was a company in Norway who bought a robotic welding machine. And they ran it 24 hours a day with 3 shifts of people, 4 people on each shift. And each shift group included 2 young people who'd just finished their apprenticeship and 2 over 50s, or people with 30 years work experience. And what we asked them all about how they use the digital technology. And the young guys said, oh, the older ones, they look at the menu and they don't remember what they're supposed to press, what button. So they don't do anything. They come and ask us. And we thought, oh, this doesn't sound very good. And we asked the older people, what do you think about the young ones? And they said, oh, they press all the buttons until they find one that works. So there were obviously quite different ways of dealing with this. So we said to the young guys, wouldn't it be best if it was 4 young people working this? Wouldn't this be more efficient? And they said, oh, no, every time the machine stops, it's the old guys who fix it. They know, like, if the material, they put the material into the machine, and if the material stops, they know how to move it because they've been welding for 30 years. They know exactly what they can do. And sometimes they change the material, they take it out and replace it with something else. And the young guys, they're scared to do this because they say the engineers have told us to do it this way. And the old guys say, no, we know exactly how you can change this. So although the technological knowledge wasn't really the best, their knowledge was important to get the technology to work. So we thought this was quite an interesting finding here, that we found this in other cases as well, similar examples. And this was confirmed by the people who developed the software technology, because they wanted to make a new version of the technology. And they invited one of the employees, they took one of the over 50s, back to their company to work with them for 3 months to develop the next version. So they wanted to take his brain and put it into the next version of the software. So they obviously saw the value of this guy's knowledge. Another example is from the public sector. This is more ordinary technology that we're used to, with PCs on the desk and people working with workflow systems, archiving systems, web publishing, stuff like this. And they said they didn't like to go on courses. And this again matches the PIAC data, which doesn't find older people participating in courses. They just said, no, we don't have time to spend 3 days on a course when perhaps 10 minutes of it is relevant for the work we do. So I thought, oh, do you not use the technology then? And they said, oh, well, yes, of course we do. We just go and ask our colleagues, or we read, or we try and use trial and error to find out how we use the systems. And we asked their bosses about this, and they were quite happy with their work. They didn't know that they weren't going on courses, but they were quite happy with the results. And we had an interesting example of one guy who refused to use this workflow system where all the tasks came to them with this workflow. He got his secretary to do that. And we thought, at last, have we found one of these stereotypes that everybody talks about, older employees who don't use the system? And then he told us, but I do use this other system. It's a mapping system. And I'm a super user. I'm actually a global super user. And I have the beta version of the software on my laptop. And I take it home and I work on it in the evenings in my free time. And he takes calls from people all over the world. He said his wife was probably going to divorce him because he takes calls in the middle of the night from Singapore to help these users to use the system. And this was a guy, he was 65. And he could have retired, but he wanted to stay on because he liked working with this system. It was a mapping system. So he's maybe an over-enthusiastic, isolated example, but we think it gives some evidence that if you find the right things for people to work with and that triggers their enthusiasm, it doesn't matter what age they are. There was obviously no cognitive reason why he couldn't do this. There were also examples where some of the older employees were a bit concerned that their more in-depth knowledge wasn't being included in the new technology. Things like one group we talked to, they write government documents, and they've spent years fine-tuning their ability to communicate complicated policy decisions to the public in such a way that they can be understood and not be ambiguous and not cause revolutions or anything. And now they said everything's done in sound bites. So the new technology is coming in and taking over, and they were a bit concerned that their knowledge was not being utilized the right way. We're not sure yet how important this is. Another finding, which I don't have very much data on, but we found large groups at risk of redundancy due to digitalization, particularly of archiving functions. And this was this is just in Norway, a small country, but we found several hundred people who were at risk of losing their work. Not necessarily risk of being made redundant, but they had to find other tasks for them to do because they didn't have any training in digital technology, and they couldn't continue doing the job. So it's just a summary from the findings of the interviews. It seems that we can't just assume that older employees are older or slower versions of the younger colleagues. They actually learn in different ways. So if we're going to help raise the competence of older employees, we need to think differently. And we also need to think about informal learning, which is more challenging because it's difficult to plan informal learning. You've more got to organize, make it have an organization that gives room for opportunity for informal learning. Well, we also think that there's a fair amount of evidence to suggest that these older employees were more selective of the use of time and energy, and they wouldn't go on a course of several days if they didn't think that was going to be useful. Or maybe they just dared to say no when their boss said go on the course. And the younger ones all said yes, sir, and went on the course, and the older ones didn't, if they just didn't think it was useful. We also found that they work well in groups of mixed ages, like the welders. There seems to be good communication, and the learning seems to actually go both ways. We found other examples of this too. We've confirmed what others have found about this concept of digital natives. I'm sure a lot of you know about this, and there's a difference between the ones who are digital natives and the ones who weren't. This, perhaps the last point, which is quite interesting, is that their knowledge was often central to making new digital technologies work. I know this isn't the central theme for this group, is to make the technology work, but I think it's interesting that they have something to contribute with there. So just my last slide here. This is some of the results from this project. We had a special edition of the European Journal of Education with articles there. And we have a book about, this book here was more about the interview data with examples of stories from these older employees. The last one here, that wasn't really our publication, but we contributed a chapter, and that includes the stuff about the welders on this about learning at work. And there's a link there to the project webpage if anybody's interested. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. I'll hand it now over to Cristina, who's going to talk a little bit about older teachers and use of digitalization.
Okay.
Oh, and by the way, if anybody has any questions that they think of during the presentation and they just want to send me a note on the chat box, then I'll be sure to pick it up. So, Cristina?
So hello everyone. So this is I'm sharing the presentation. I hope it's visible. My presentation, it's about an ongoing project. It's we are still collecting data on this. So I have like a title, but maybe I drafted too long. But the basic idea was to show you my current project that maybe it's connected to this action, the Digi-Net cost action. And maybe to get some feedback, and also because this is just the beginning of the project, and it's part of a bigger activity. So we have the chance to collect data and see how digitalization plans go out for teachers, even after a period, over time, and for example, after receiving classes or courses. This is I'm starting to present you a little about the context of the project to see what it is all about. But basically, what I suggested in this project is to test or to see how important are digitalization plans for teachers, and also how to see if whether there are any personal and social and organizational resource that teachers could use to reduce technological stress. So my affiliation, it's in Romania. I'm a researcher, scientist at the Psychology and Educational Sciences from Iași in Romania. It's in the northeast part of Romania, at the Gheorghezane Institute of Economic and Social Research, and also affiliated to the Romanian Academy, but in the Iași branch. So the context of this project, what we are doing now, is it's that there are 3 ongoing national calls that facilitate digitalization in Romania, specifically for the educational system, and specifically for teachers and personnel that are in the schools and educational system, and also for students. But some of the calls are specifically for teachers, for develop their skills, their digital skills. The 3 ongoing calls that are right now available, it's about developing intelligent laboratories, smart labs, within schools by acquiring specific technological equipment for educational activities, digitalizing the ethics management within academia, but the current project that we are collecting data, it's not focusing on that, and acquiring digital educational materials and equipment for administrative purpose within schools. So the first and the third, this is where we collect data. These calls, it's very important, is that they are also focusing on delivering courses for teachers and administrative personnel to develop digital skills, to use smart labs, and also to develop digital materials, or to use digital materials that are acquired within the educational system. So our job in this project is to assess first, do a need assessment, whether this kind of specific activities would be important for teachers. And it's important to also note that our project is not just for the elder teachers, but because it's in this context, and I'm presenting it right now for elder teachers. I also did some preliminary analysis on available data that we have right now, but the whole project is for all teachers, not specifically for elder ones. But to get back on the goals, I think the most important is to assess how important are the developing competencies or digital competencies for teachers, and how they see it, if it's very important for them or not. I will show you some of the types of activities that we assessed. Also, evaluating technological stress regarding the plans for digitalizing the educational system. From my knowledge, because this part of digitalization, I understand it because it's also something that I manage and understand it from a personal perspective, but from the scientific perspective, it seems like this is the most important component about how technological stress is managed. And here I found out from the literature an instrument that I see that it seems to be, from my point of view, it seems good. And specifically to this project is to evaluate and test whether motivational, persistent, a straight professional and organizational identification, and also satisfaction with work could reduce technological stress for teachers. Because this is my expertise in psychological studies. This is what I specialize on, about motivational persistence and social identification. This is something that I'm working on because it's related to my domain, to social psychology. And also it's also an additional question would be if whether technological stress could also make teachers want to leave their profession early. So this would be like this could be, of course, something positive, because maybe some of the teachers could do something that they relate more to, and do something meaningful with their profession, but also could be a really big problem for the educational system when people are leaving the profession. Just because these plans in the national context would force them to develop digital skills. So for each of these components, we have a big theoretical background. I'm not presenting the theoretical part of the presentation, because I just put the instruments used, and we can see from here what we are trying to measure, and what are the factors that we accounted for. For the assessment of needs for digitalization plans, we just took the guides and the ongoing calls and the specific activities that were suggested to be implemented, and we gave the participants, to teachers, to see if this is important for them or not. To have like a basic line, if which of them would be more important. We use a technostress scale. It's a measure that assesses 5 types of technostress: techno overload, invasion, complexity, insecurity, and uncertainty. For me, it seems that this is a scale that it's showing more than just a general perspective about this is very stressful, but rather it shows about that maybe teachers could have difficulties because developing new skills could mean more work or changing habits or living on tight time schedules to do things, or because maybe having a phone or having some technological instruments could mean invasion, like getting notifications or getting calls every hour. It's not very clear when you are at work and when you are at home and ready to have some leisure time. So maybe this could be like an invasion, less time with family, interference, technological notification invading personal life. And the complexity, because it's very there are new terms and new concepts and new ways of doing things, and this takes time, and it's interesting that I did hear in the other presentation that this is not something that people like having time, extra time for learning new stuff, but rather doing it in their own way. And insecurity, because maybe some people could feel overwhelmed that they are not doing well or not developing new skills, or the threat to job security, maybe feeling that they could be replaced if they are not doing well. And of course, technological uncertainty, that it's about new developments, changes, and upgrades. So even if you start learning some new skills and develop habits and all of that, they are still upgrading really fast. So this could be also stressful. Motivational persistence, it's a Romanian instrument that I'm using, and I used it in my PhD studies. It's a scale about personality that it's actually like a really strong resilient factor that people could nurture and develop over time, that could help people invest effort and overcome difficulties. And it's each instrument that I use, it's mostly assessed on a scale, intensity scales from 1 to 5, very low, very high, and the satisfaction scale, that it's the last one, it's on a 1 to 6 intensity scale, Likert scale. But professional and organizational identification, we used a small measure and general assessment for each professional and organizational identification. I think they could, in this context, they could be different, because maybe people don't like being in an organization, but they really love teaching, but they don't like the specific school they are in. So this could be something interesting to see. And this model of social identification, it's related to social identity theory. It's used not just in psychology, it's used in so many other domains in the social sciences. It's about how much cognitively and emotionally people invest in their relationship with the school, with their work, how much joy it brings to them, and how dedicated they are, and how if they are related, if they value this kind of identity. So we thought this could be like a resource. Work satisfaction and professional dropout intentions. Work satisfaction, we used a local instrument from Romania, but it's based on international models of work satisfaction. And professional dropout intentions, we adapted specific measures from the international literature in psychology. It's more like a intent to leave the professional. We didn't actually assess whether they would abandon their profession or not. Is just to have a glimpse of whether technological stress could relate to, maybe teachers being in their before retirement, for example, or being in their first years of teaching, would say, I think this is too hard. Maybe I should quit because I don't think I can do it. I can not be like a long life learner in this kind of context. And these are the what we collected data from participants regarding their characteristic, age, gender, educational level, teaching level, professional experience, what kind of professions, financial level. This is something that they rather not say, most of them. And all of the questions contain the options I prefer not to answer or rather not say. And this is something that, of course, could, it's becoming a difficulty for me, for example, because I cannot do some general perspectives on comparing ages if they are not reporting ages. So we have like a little bit over 200 respondents so far, but it's not done. We have January, February, and March to collect data, and then they apply for projects and they get the answers. So this is just the first part of the study. And so far, there are more women responding. There's most of them have bachelor studies or master studies, or even and some of them have doctoral studies. The teaching level, it's most of them teach in primary school or high school, and some of them rather not say. Professional experience. They have a lot of professional experience. I think I did something right. The educational level there shouldn't be there, but most of them, almost half of our respondents have over 15 years of experience. So we would expect professional and organizational identification to be high. And financial characteristics, well, as I said, there are lots of them who would rather not say. They wouldn't report on this. The mean of the age is 40, almost 41, but ages of teachers that participated in this so far, it's between 20 and 71 years. I did some descriptive analysis for you to have like an image about how important are the activities. For example, the ones that we assessed are whether it's important for them to develop digital skills or develop digital skills for virtual reality, for augmented reality, how important it is to have smart labs in their schools, how important it is to revise curriculum, educational curriculum, how important is for them to have like performant equipment, how important is for them to access virtual libraries or And if this is where I made like a new variable and put some of the numbers on two categories, under 55 and over 55, and you can see that they're not so different. I mean, teachers over 55, they still think that all of these activities are very important. So the scale was from 1 to 5, and you can see that most of the activities are over 4, mean over 4. That's like very high. It's almost on the upper limit, yeah. And the standard deviation are not so high. Here are some more activities that we assessed. Access to virtual library, how important is to have to modernize equipment in psychological labs, for example, or acquiring digital equipment, or acquire educational content, or to have digital content, digital educational content recognized digitally, or connect to devices in smart labs, or how important it's to have trainings for teachers. And again, the means for each category, it's on the upper mean, to say it like this, and standard deviations are not so high. So this is like a really big agreement for them. And of course, I also did this for the variables, motivational persistent, and types of technological stress and identification, and intentions to quit the profession and satisfaction. And as you can see, there are slightly lower means for teachers over 55. And slightly bigger means for those under 55. But I also did some comparative, just preliminary. I just tested to see if there are any differences between them. And although you can see that the means are slightly different, there are no significant differences. So maybe maybe this is not the whole story. Maybe we need to collect more data, or maybe teachers that are already familiar or already having some digital skills could have completed our questionnaires, and maybe those that are really struggling or having stressful time developing these skills did not complete our questionnaires, because our questionnaires, of course, they were sent online. So maybe this is not the whole story. Maybe only those that know how to use online resources completed. So maybe this is not very stressful for them. But so far, we did not found significant group differences. And finally, this is something that we intend to test in the first part of the study, like a process model that I think would be interesting to see. But yeah, there are some conclusions, or not exactly conclusions, but rather some limits. For example, in the context of the Digi-Net cost action, we didn't measure any digital resources that could help reduce technological stress. So I'm not sure about that. Maybe this would be like some, we would need some good ideas to do this, on what kind of resources that are technological could help teachers to manage stress, technological stress easier, because I didn't assess this here. So yeah, it's kind of, this is the whole story.
All right, thank you so much. This is a really interesting study, and the fact that you weren't able to find significant differences between those over 55 and those under when it came to different factors of technological stress in terms of adapting to technology and willingness to use technology and so forth is quite an important finding because we know that that it is a risk factor in terms of early retirement. So if it isn't about motivation, it might be something else. It might be about how the technology is being rolled out. Might be about how they're assessed as to how they use the technology. There could be all sorts of other factors which are leading to very big differences in terms of outcome.